it's Mo. This is a little bit of a weird setup, but it is time to do one of my favorite and not favorite videos of the year. Welcome to the Keeper Toss for 2022. We are going to go through all the physical books that I still own and see if I'm going to keep them for my red shelves or if I am going to toss them. And by toss them, of course, I don't mean I'm going to throw them away. I don't throw books away, but I do give a lot of books to little free libraries or donate them or loan them out to friends. Some of the books that I've read in 2022 that I don't currently still have on my red shelf, I have already lent out or given away, but I don't unhaul red books until this video. Last year in 2022, I read a total of 135 books. A lot of those books were audiobooks, some of them were lent to me, and many of them are here on my red shelf. So I do have a shelf up top here, and that is for my project books that I'm working on. So it's kind of a TBR shelf, but for project books. So my BookTube Spin was up there, my TBR Tackle was up there during 2022, and it's time to clean that shelf off as well because my DNFs also live on that shelf. So let's start with the project books. I am going to go through every book on the shelf, but I'm not going to talk a lot about any of the books. I'm just going to tell you what's going to happen to them. Long Division by Kissy Lemon was a TBR Tackle book. That one will be going back on my TBR. The rest of these two piles were from BookTube Spin, and they will also be going back on my TBR. We have Speak Memory by Vladimir Nabokov, Walk Across America by Peter Jenkins, The Maltese Falcon and the Thin Man by Dashiell Hammett, Very Good Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse, Running in the Family by Michael Olgiate, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, Vile Bodies by Evelyn Waugh, The Good Life Book 1 and 2 by Scott and Helen Nearing. And then these two books were actually books that I got on the Spin, but I never read. Big Bang by David Bowman and The Witches of Eastwick by John Updike. All these books will be going back on my TBR. Next we have my stack of DNFs. We have The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. Unfortunately, I tried to read this one twice. I got about 2/3 of the way through, but I am DNFing it, and this is going on the unhaul pile. So this is our first official unhaul. Then we have Wisteria Cabin by Robert M. Coates. I'm still hoping to finish this 1940s horror, so we can put that back on the shelf. We have Here Comes the Sun by Nicole Dennis Benn. This is a contemporary novel about a lesbian living in Jamaica. I definitely want to come back to this one as well. Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own by Eddie S. Glaude. I got about a quarter of the way through, and I definitely want to continue reading this one. The Seven of Doubt by Douglas Adams is a posthumous collection of his short stories, essays, interviews, and a unfinished last novel. I have read the unfinished last novel, but I have not read the rest of the book. I was planning on doing a Douglas Adams reading vlog, so this one might make it in there, and I'm going to keep it on my DNF shelf. Utilitarianism by John Stuart Mill is a nonfiction, and I only got about 10 pages into this, so I think it's just going to go back on my TBR shelf. Ball 4 by Jim Bouton is a baseball memoir. I got about a quarter of the way through this. It's an epistolary memoir, so it's all told in diary entries, and it is something that I would like to finish, so I'm going to put it back on my DNF shelf. And then we have The Artist's Way, which I also got about a quarter of the way through. I have not touched this book at all in 2022. It is a manual and workbook for a spiritual path to higher creativity by Julia Cameron. I'm going to keep this on the DNF shelf. I don't know when I'm going to get to it, but maybe one day. Then I have 3 of the books that I've read so far this year, which will end up back on my red shelf when we're done decluttering it. We have Down the Shore with a Golden Retriever Named Sammy by Kim Cerullo. This is a homemade book about her dog's adventures in New Jersey. It is very cute. I picked it up from a little free library. I'm glad I read it, but that's definitely an unhaul. Franny, the Queen of Provincetown, which is one of my all-time favorite queer books. It's written by John Preston. I read this originally in 2021 and I reread it in 2022, so this one will definitely be staying on my read shelf. I got Heather the Totality in a little free library. It is very short and it was written by Matthew Weiner, who created the show Mad Men. I enjoyed this book. This is a maybe keep. Next, I have On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This is a autofiction novel written in letter form to his mother. It's very poetic. It's very hard to read. It's very harsh. It has some explicit sexual content. I really enjoyed it, but I can't picture myself rereading it, so this is another maybe. Next, we have The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I loved this book, definitely keeping it. Back in February of 2022, I read Hell of a Book by Jason Mott. This won the National Book Award for 2021. I did enjoy this book, but I can't see myself rereading it, so this is going to go on the Unhaul pile. We have a couple of mysteries. You'll see a common theme with P.D. James. She's my all-time favorite mystery writer, and so every book that comes up I'm going to keep. This one was actually on my read shelf because I got it a few years ago and I hadn't read it yet, but that is Sleep No More, 6 Murderous Tales. This one I'm definitely keeping. Cat About Town by Kate Conti was a so-so read for me. It is a cat cozy mystery, and since I'm doing a cat cozy mystery reading vlog series, I'm going to keep all those mystery editions for now, because maybe I will need them in future videos. Next, we have The Unpleasantness at the Belladonna Club. This is one book in the Lord Peter Wimsey series by Dorothy L. Sayers. I really like Dorothy L. Sayers. I've read 2 of her books and I have 2 more left to read. I'm definitely going to keep this one on my read shelf. Next, we have The Secret Adversary by Agatha Christie. I love Agatha Christie and I collect vintage mass market paperbacks of her work, so we're always going to keep those. Speaking of Agatha Christie, I have The Christie Affair by Nina de Gramont. I read this for the Christie's Missing Readathon in December. I really enjoyed reading this one and I'm definitely going to keep it on my read shelf. The last book that I read in the year is Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. This is the first Jean Rhys that I've read, and I have quite a few others. I've been collecting Jean Rhys books even though I never read her before, so I'm definitely going to keep this one. What Are You Going Through by Sigrid Nunez. I read this one on audio, but I also had a physical copy. This was my last TBR tackle book in 2022. I really enjoyed this book and I love the cover with a cat on it, but I can't see myself rereading this one, and I think my friend Isaac would really like it, so I'm going to pass it along to him. Oh Gee, It's Christmas by Heath P. Boyce. This is an independently published cozy mystery about the town next to mine. I didn't think this was like a brilliant book or anything. I can't picture myself rereading it. For some reason, maybe for a future video or something, I kind of want to hold on to this one. So I'm going to put it in the maybe pile. And then we have another P.D. James book. This is her one and only true crime. It's The Mall and the Pear Tree. This is all about the 1811 Ratcliffe Highway murders. And as I already said, I'm keeping all P.D. James. Still Life by Louise Penny. I read this, I think, in March of 2022 and I loved it. I have the second in the series and I definitely plan to continue the Inspector Gamache series. Keeping this one. Next, we have Death in a White Tie by Niall Marsh. I didn't love Death in a White Tie, but I think I'm going to keep it because I do have a couple more of her books that I want to read, and if I do end up liking her, this might be one that I want to reread. Then we have Julie Smith's The Axeman Jazz. This is one of her mysteries in the Skip Langdon series. It all takes place in New Orleans. You know I love New Orleans. I'm definitely keeping this one to go with my collection. In 2022, I reread Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. This is the copy that I've had since I was a teenager, definitely keeping it. I buddy read The Haunted Lady by Mary Roberts Rinehart with Say Kevy this year. This is the 3rd Mary Roberts Rinehart book that I read this year and the 2nd in the Miss Pinkerton series. We're definitely keeping all Mary Roberts Rinehart. She is fast becoming one of my favorite mystery writers. Catnap, this is by Carol Nelson Douglas, and it is the first in the Midnight Louise series. This was another meh cat cozy mystery for me, but since I'm keeping cat cozy mysteries, we're gonna keep it. And I'm gonna put the cat cozy mysteries up here on my project shelf. For the first time ever, I read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I read this one on audio, but I had found this vintage mass market paperback copy earlier in the year, and I'm definitely keeping this one. The first in the Miss Pinkerton series, which is aptly titled Miss Pinkerton by Mary Roberts Reinhardt. We're keeping this. Seed Folks by Paul Fleischman. This is a middle grade or young adult book. I really enjoyed this short book, but I don't need to keep it. It's going on the Unhaul pile. Breakfast at Tiffany's. This was a reread this year. This is the copy that I read when I was in my 20s and probably bought in New York. Just putting this one back on the red shelf. Another mass market paperback is My Mortal Enemy by Willa Cather. I really loved this book, and it's definitely staying on my red shelf. Two Old Women, which is an Alaskan legend of betrayal, courage, and survival by Velma Wallace. I'm definitely keeping this one because I would like to read more Velma Wallace, and I think it would go well in my new collection of works by Indigenous authors. I found Disquiet at a library book sale. This is by an Australian author, Julia Lee, and it is a haunting gothic tale of a woman who returns to her family home, which not everyone is happy about. I definitely want to keep this one, and I would love to read some more by Julia Lee. Ghost Bride by Yangtze Chu. This was also a TBR Tackle book. You can see vlogs of all the books that I read for TBR Tackle in 2022, and I will link that playlist down below. I read it on audio, but will I reread it? I don't know. This is going to be a maybe. I read Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto. There's another story in the back of this book called Moonlight Shadow, which I still want to read. So I think I'm actually going to put this on my TBR. I picked up Bill Bryson's African Diary at a little free library. Okay, so I have like a love-hate relationship with Bill Bryson. I've liked several of his books. I've disliked others. This fits right in the middle. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it, but I do have a collection of his books on my red shelf. I think this has to be a maybe. I read Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer this year, and it's one of my favorite books of the year, so we're definitely keeping this. Since I've read this one, I got a copy of the third book in this edition, so now I just need to find the second book in this edition, and I will be super happy to have them on my red shelf. This is the year that I read my first Shirley Jacksons, the second of which was The Haunting of Hill House. We're keeping all Shirley Jackson. Shirley Jackson is amazing. If you haven't read her, you must. We've come across our first book of poetry. This is Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. There's only one poem that I marked that I really liked, so I'll take a picture of that one and then I will donate this book. Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk made it onto my top books of the year. Definitely keeping this one. Vampires Never Get Old, Tales with a Fresh Bite, edited by Zoraida Cordova and Natalie C. Parker, was a fun anthology of young adult vampire stories, and there were quite a few that I really enjoyed. It's also a signed copy, which is pretty cool. But I don't need to keep this one. We're going to put this in the Unhaul. Next, we have A Children's Bible by Lydia Millett. I loved this book. Definitely keeping this hardcover copy, even though it doesn't have a dust jacket. Another reread this year was The Hobbit. My husband and I listened to this book on audio, but this is the edition that I bought before the movies came out because I had never read this one for some reason, and when the movies were coming out, I knew I wanted to read The Hobbit before I watched Lord of the Rings, so I bought this in Manhattan, and I love this edition. It was also fun to read it on audio and flip through the physical book at the same time. So we're putting this one back on the red shelf. Next we have Alice Walker, The Third Life of Grange Copeland. This is the first Alice Walker book I've ever read, and I can't wait to read more of her work. I love this edition. It's so cute. And we're definitely keeping it. Monkey Beach by Eden Robinson. I read this during Skoden and I really, really enjoyed this one. I'm definitely keeping it and I can't wait to read more of Eden Robinson's work. Revenge is the second Yoko Ogawa book I've ever read. This is a novella told in a collection of short stories. I loved it. So creepy, so spooky, so atmospheric, so good. I can't wait to reread this one. Another woman, Black American modern classic author that I read for the first time in 2022 is Gloria Naylor. I read The Women of Brewster Place. If you've been watching my videos, you might know that this is a book that I love, but also that emotionally scarred me. I still have nightmares about this book, so although it was an incredibly tough read, I'm going to be keeping it. Another book that I loved this year is To Each His Own by Leonardo Scasia. This is a Sicilian modern classic and an NYRB book. You can pretty much guarantee I'm going to keep all NYRB books, but I also really loved this one. Another NYRB book is The True Deceiver by Tove Jansson. I've never read anything by her before, and this was incredible. Definitely keeping it. My one and only new book purchase in 2022, and it was my first ever pre-order, is Something Is Always Happening Somewhere by Kelly McClure. I happen to know Kelly McClure online. We lived in Brooklyn at the same time. This was another book that scarred me and I have nightmares about still, but also such an amazing debut novella, and I really loved it. I can't wait to see what else she does. We're definitely keeping this one. Another NYRB book is Seasons of Migration to the North by Tayyib Salih. This one is a Sudanese modern classic, and yes, you guessed it, we're keeping it, but also I loved it. If you haven't read anything from Sudan, I suggest this one. And then we'll have a controversial one. Now, don't get mad at me, but I didn't love Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca, and I will be unhauling this short horror. I found this jacketless cover of The Man Who Died Twice in a little free library in Highlands, New Jersey. My dad, his friend, and I have all read these books. Even though I loved The Thursday Murder Club and I really enjoyed the second in the series by Richard Osman, I don't think I need to keep these, but like I said, since we're kind of having a read-along together, I'm going to keep them for now. Lakewood by Megan Giddings was on my 21 books I found out about in 2021 and I wanted to read in 2022 list, and I did read it in February of 2022. I really enjoyed this horror. I'm going to be keeping it. In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead was also on my 21 books I found out about in 2021 that I want to read in 2022 list. And I also read it and I also really enjoyed it and I also would keep it, except my friend Michael wants to read it, so I'm going to loan it to him. Please Look After Mom by Kyen Suk Shin was one of my TBR tackle reads, and I really enjoyed this book and I definitely want to keep it because I think I definitely need to reread it. The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell was a book that I had heard about early on in BookTube and I was really looking forward to read. I bought it on my birthday book buying trip at a used bookstore in Belmar, New Jersey, and I read it not too long after that. I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. I thought it was going to be amazing and it wasn't amazing. Will I ever reread this? I don't know. I'm going to put it on my maybe pile. There by Tommy Orange was one of my TBR tackle books. I loved this book and I can't believe it was a debut novel, and I can't believe that Tommy Orange hasn't put anything else out yet. I can't wait to read more of his work. Maisie Dobbs was a book that I have had on my TBR for over 12 years, maybe over 15 years at this point. I didn't love the first in the series by Jacqueline Winspear, so I'm not going to be keeping this one. I read The River Between by Mugiwang Thongo, which is a Kenyan modern classic for TBR tackle. I really enjoyed this one, even though it was a difficult read, both in subject matter and writing style. I would love to read more of Thiongo's work, and I'm definitely going to keep this one on my shelves for now. The first book that I finished in 2022, it was The Ice Storm by Rick Moody. I read this in January of 2022 because it was a DNF the previous year. I love this movie by Ang Lee. This book, however, I didn't love, and it's going on the Unhaul pile. Next, we have my first Mary Robert Reinhardt that I read, and I adored, The Red Lamp, so we're keeping that. And next, we have one of my worst books of the year, The Dream Quest of Villette Bow by Keej Johnson. This is a retelling, reimagining of a H.P. Lovecraft story. Maybe if I had read that story, I would like this book more. I found this in a little free library, and it's going back to a little free library. A similar story is with Dementia. I found this in a little free library, and it will be going back to a little free library. I was super surprised that I didn't love All Systems Red by Martha Wells. I got this in my birthday book buying trip, and I thought it was going to be a new favorite, but it just wasn't. Now, a lot of these books I've found on free audio sites, and I think that that might be a good way to read the rest of this series. I didn't hate this book so much that I wouldn't continue, but it's going on the maybe pile. I might read one more book and then see if I need to unhaul this. One of my 20 books that I found out about in 2020, but I found in 2022, was Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi. I read this for TBR Tackle. It made it onto my TBR Tackle list, and I really enjoyed this. I'm going to keep this one for now. On my 21 books I found out about in 2021 and I wanted to read in 2022 list, it's always such a mouthful to say, was Upright Women Wanted by Sarah Gailey. Lesbian book, so we're keeping that. I read Underfoot in Show Business by Helene Hanff for Nonfiction November, and I love Helene Hanff. All her books are staying. I was lucky enough to find Kate May Ghost Stories Part 2, and I have the first of these nonfiction books, and I will be keeping the second. Another NYRB book that I got this year was An African in Greenland by Tete Michael Kombasi. Maybe I got this in 2021 actually, but I was super happy to find this nonfiction about an African who dreams of Greenland and wants to see what it's all about, so he makes his way there over many years. This was a really interesting nonfiction that I really enjoyed and can see myself rereading in the not too distant future. Ellen Foster by Kay Gibbons is, I guess, considered a modern classic, and it is part of the Southern Gothic. This teeny tiny book took me so long to read. I found it quite difficult. I did end up enjoying it, but it's gonna go on the unhaul pile. One of my least favorite books of the year is The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling. Now, if I had realized that Erin Sterling is a pen name for Rachel Hawkins, I might not have picked this one up. It's about a witch. It's going on the unhaul pile. The Space Between Worlds was on my 20 books I found out about in 2020 and I wanted to read in 2021 list. I loved this really interesting queer sci-fi adventure. Definitely keeping this one. A totally random graphic novel that I found in the Little Free Library was Here. It was really interesting, but I think my friend Isaac would like it, so I'm going to pass it along to him. I had no idea what it was about. I ended up reading this one in the summer, and I ended up really liking this one. Even after I finished it, it was on my mind a little more than I thought it would be, but I don't know if this is one that I would reread or I would want to keep on my shelf. I think this has to be a maybe. Dark Victory by Tim Sale and Jeff Loeb is one of my favorite graphic novels. This was a reread for me this year, and of course I'm keeping it and putting it back on my comic shelf. The 1913 Pattison Silk Strike, a children's book by Angelica M. Santomoro and Evelyn M. Hershey. I picked up totally randomly at a Little Free Library. I had never heard of this historic New Jersey event. I really enjoyed reading about it, and I would like to read an actual history of this story. I don't need to keep this children's book, so I'm going to donate it back to a Little Free Library. I read my first two Akwaeke Emezi books this year. One of them was Freshwater. This one was really interesting, and I'll probably be keeping all Akwaeke Emezi books. Funny in Farsi is a memoir about an Iranian family moved to California. I did not think it was very good. I read this for TBR Tackle as well, so you can see more of my thoughts in that TBR Tackle vlog, but we are going to donate this to a Little Free Library. Murder on the SS Rosa can also be given back to a Little Free Library. This was a independently published mystery novella by Lee Strauss. I definitely don't plan on continuing with this series. Palmetto by Ania Alborn has a very similar story. I found it in a Little Free Library, and it's going back to a Little Free Library. We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson is amazing. We're keeping all Shirley Jackson. Trevor Noah, Born a Crime, I actually read on audio, and I would highly suggest that if you are going to read this book, that is the way to do it, because Trevor Noah reads his own memoir, and this was incredible. I am going to keep this physical copy, even though I think I would always revisit it on audio as well, but maybe I would do a combination of physical and audio reading. This one was great. Getting down to the last few books, we have Amaced Maupin, Further Tales of the City. This was a reread for me, and I really liked it. This is the third in the Tales of the City series. I have been rereading the Tales of the City slowly but surely, as I found almost all of the books in Little Free Libraries, so we're keeping this one. Next, we have The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. This is the longest book I read this year, according to Goodreads, but it's a novel told in verse, and it's very short and quick and easy to get through. It is a young adult novel about a young mixed race man living in England who discovers himself and discovers drag. It was really, really good. I really, really liked it, but I don't think I need to keep it. I don't think I'll ever be rereading this one. And then we have the Thursday Murder Club, the first in the Richard Osman Thursday Murder Club series, and we're gonna keep that one for now. I read Pet by Akwaeke Meze. This is her young adult novel. I'm dying to read its prequel, Bitter. I read Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi for TBR Tackle. I read this one on audio. I found this proof copy in a little free library, and although I really liked this book, I don't think I need to keep this copy. The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. This is the first Lucy Foley book I've ever read, and it was fun. It was fast-paced, it was silly, it was a page-turner. I did read this one on audio. I'm never gonna read it again. It can definitely go back to a little free library. And then we have Nothing to See Here, which I found in 2021. I really like this book by Kevin Wilson about a aimless young woman who becomes a babysitter to two children who spontaneously combust. I'm definitely keeping this one. We have Mad Mouse by Chris Grabenstein. I've had this one forever. It was down in my basement box books. It's set in New Jersey. I want to continue on the series, so I think I'm going to keep this one for now. At the same time that I read Maisie Dobbs, I read Murder at the Brightwell by Ashley Weaver. You can see a vlog of me reading both these historical fictions. I will list that down below. I didn't love this. I'm definitely unhauling this one. The Story of My Teeth by Valerie Lucelli was not exactly what I was expecting, but it was such a weird and interesting story. This was translated by Christina McSweeney, and she definitely has a hand in the story as well. I would be really interested to read more of Lucelli's work, and I'm definitely keeping this book. It's very cool looking, and I really enjoyed it. One of the first poetry books that I read this year was The Women and the Men by Nikki Giovanni. I had never heard of this Black poet before, but I really liked a lot of the poems in here, and I'm trying to build up my poetry reading chops and my poetry collection, so I'm going to put that one on my red shelf. I found The Hole by Hee Young Poon in a little free library on the beach in Asbury Park, and although I thought this was a really interesting Korean psychological horror, I don't see myself revisiting it, so we're gonna unhaul that one. I read Final Girls by Riley Sager. I found this one my first year of BookTube, and I have been saying I was gonna read it forever, so I finally did. I don't need to keep it though. The last novel that I have is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This was on my 21 books I found out about in 2021, but I want to read in 2022, and I did read it in 2022, and it was amazing. I read this book on audio, read by Ruby D, and I highly suggest you do the same. The last two books on my shelf are both picture books. I have Catwise by Wilbur Pippin and Marion Winters. This is a coffee table book from the 1970s, and it's just pictures of cats. So we're definitely keeping that. This year I had also found this really cool children's book called The Fox Went Out on a Chilly Night. It's based on an old folk song, but I love that song, and this one had really beautiful illustrations and was adapted by Peter Spire. So I will 100% be keeping this one. So those were all my physical books that I still have in 2022. My red shelf is clear. We can put the books that I've read in 2023 back on there. Oh, it looks kind of sad and lonely, but we have huge stacks of books to put away on the red shelf. We have a pretty solid stack of books that I'm unhauling, and we have a little maybe pile. So let me count how many I have unhauled and how many I have maybe, and I will be back with you in a second. So I am unhauling 23 books. I have a stack here and a stack here, and I have 8 maybes that might also follow these 23. Now, 23 out of 135 books read isn't the best, but I think this is the most that I've unhauled, so I'm excited about that, and I'm excited to drop these off in a little free library. Let me know if you think any of the books that I kept I should get rid of. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!